start the young scientist presentations. We would like to invite Dr. Koo Miller, Associate Professor at Nanyang Technological University, to chair the session, and our two presenters, Dr. Mahonri Owen and Ms. Tanya Manchanda. Dr. Koo, please.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm Ilagu from Nanyang Technological University, and I have the pleasure of inviting our two young speakers here today. Our first presenter this evening is Mahonri Owen. So he is a senior lecturer from the University of Waikato in New Zealand, and his research interest in neuroprosthetics. So please welcome Dr. Mahonri Owen. The floor is yours, and whenever you're ready.
Tēnā koutou katoa, tēnei te mihi ki a koutou. I te taha o tōku pāpai, e uri o hūno ngā puhiroa ko Ngāti Tuwhare Toahau, I te taha o tōku māma no Uropi ahau. Ko Mahonri Owen tōku ingoa. Kia ora. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, to the event organisers for allowing me to come here today and share something that means a lot to me. And it's very close to my heart. There are a few of us that have come up from New Zealand, 3 of us at least, there may be more. The easy way to find us is to look for all the good-looking people. You can be a New Zealander if you like. Oh, you are? Well, we're here in full force. Thank you. So, what I'd like to do is share an experience with you all that changed the direction of my career and of my life. From 2008 to 2010, I got the opportunity to live in Southern Africa. And for those of you that are doing doctorates, I believe I learned more in that 2 years than I did in the 3.5 years that I had as a doctoral candidate. And it wasn't necessarily technical learning that I had in that 2 years, but it was more so life skills. And learning about people and trying to understand people. Now there was one lady in a place just south of Johannesburg, in a place called Terfontein, who taught me this lesson. Now she was a lady that when I met, she was confined to a wheelchair. And over the 6 months I was there, I got to learn more about her. She had 2 daughters. She was the breadwinner or the main income of that home. She was an incredibly faithful woman. She was very strong, and as our relationship grew, she got to trust me more, and eventually shared the experience of how she lost the ability to walk. And I remember the day really clearly. It was quite a typical kind of Johannesburg day, quite warm. And we sat on her front porch in this township. And she said that one day, she was going about her normal life. She had just returned home from work, looked after her babies. She went to sleep that night, and the next morning she woke up and she couldn't get out of bed. She couldn't feel her legs. She didn't know what was wrong. And from that day on, she was unable to use them. She couldn't be diagnosed by doctors, and so she went throughout those next 10 years of her life without that ability. And I remember the experience really clearly, not because of what she told me, but because of how I felt. I felt kind of useless, because all I wanted to do was to help this lady, but I didn't have the power to help her. And so I decided from that day on, no matter what I do in my life, it was going to be to help people. My grandmother taught me this whakatauki or proverb, which is he aha te mea nui o te ao. Translated into English, what is the most important thing in this world? In every country I've been in, the answer has always been the same. He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. Which means it is people, it is people, it is people. Three of the most important people in my life are on that slide there. That's three of my children. We've had one more since. But you might be thinking, what does all of this have to do with neuroprosthetics? I believe it has everything to do with it. When somebody loses a limb or the ability to control their body, it's not just a physical disability, their life has changed forever. And amputation and nervous system disorders stop people from contributing to their families, their extended families, and their communities. In 2017, 57 million people suffered from amputations or traumatic limb loss. That doesn't include those with nervous system disorders, and it also doesn't include those who are born without limbs or congenital diseases. These amputees still, even though we have prosthetic devices that are meant to help them and improve their quality of life, still reject these devices. And the reasons are quite simple, but the reasons we're going into it gets quite involved. So the way they control the devices, how the devices function, what they look like, and discomfort. And I could go into it, I won't now, but there's a lot behind those 4 reasons of rejection. So what I decided in 2014 was to make a brain-controlled prosthetic hand. And I did this because I saw it as a project at the university I was going to. And I'm not kidding when I said that I thought it was cool because Star Wars, Terminator, that's all the stuff you start thinking about when you think of brain-controlled prosthetics or man-machine interfaces. So I got into this project that I believe was far over my head. I aim to empower amputees or those who have lost limbs by creating intuitive prosthetics that allow them to participate in life again. So to do this, you can kind of view the human body as a system, and this is quite typical for engineers to do. It is kind of my background. It's to start simplifying these really complex systems. So we all have a brain that creates signals that travel through our nervous system and which eventually control our limbs. As an engineer, I like to simplify things, and place of the brain we have a signal generator, something that sends out a signal. We then have a communication pathway, and we have a device that is controlled, some type of device. So if you look at it this way, you can start thinking. If somebody's nervous system wasn't working correctly, could we potentially take a signal from the brain and then deliver it directly to somebody's hand? Or if they don't have a hand, could we take a signal from a nervous system and then redirect it? I like to call it hijack it to a separate prosthetic device. And so I started trying to do that. And the first attempts were interesting, and I'll talk about them, but what I want to do, because I know it's been a long day, is to do a little exercise with everyone. So if everyone could lift up their right hands nice and high. Pretty good. I saw a few left hands go up. So what I want you to do is start moving your right hand around however you want to. And while you're doing that, I'm going to ask you some questions. The first question is, how many bones do you think are in your right hand? Yell out an answer if you want to take a guess. I'm open. There's a cheater over here, I think. He got it right straight away. 27. Okay. How many joints are in your hand? No more answers from that side of the room, I think. Anyone else want to guess? Don't be shy. 27 again. All right, we'll make it a bit harder. How many muscles do you think there are that control your hand? Everyone's getting nervous this now. 34. All right, and what's interesting is that a lot of them are not even inside your hand, they're down here in your forearm. All right, you can put your hands down. I see everyone's getting sore hands. The last one, how many ligaments and tendons do you think there are? 9, that's a pretty good guess. Anyone else want to challenge that? There's over 120. Now, with the information I just gave you, there's pretty much one conclusion, is that your hand is a mechanical masterpiece. To have that many different things interacting to do exactly what we want them to do is amazing. And on top of that, that's just the mechanical part of your hand. We haven't even started talking about the brain or the nervous system and those interactions. So I started designing these hands. All right, these are some semi-successful ones here on the PowerPoint, but I learned about 400 different ways how not to create prosthetic hands because of how complex they were. So you see simplified versions there. The next step was to connect these devices with our brain or with physiological signals. So you see on the far right there's a student named Luke August, also very handsome, also from New Zealand, who created an EMG-based control of the prosthetic hand. So taking the potential difference from your forearm, recognizing gestures that your hands are doing, and then sending them to the prosthetic hand that was made. On the top there, this was on national television in New Zealand a few years ago, where this man named Duncan Garner, in front of the whole nation, tried to move a prosthetic hand with his brain. And the way that worked is you can determine how much somebody's concentrating or relaxing depending on their brain state. So in that case, what happened is we had a threshold somewhere in the middle there, so that when Duncan started concentrating, it got to a point where it exceeded that threshold and that prosthetic hand moved. Now that's cool. We're getting closer to the Terminator Star Wars goal and the more ultimate goal of trying to help people. So we needed to step it up a little bit. And according to literature, what I thought the next step would be to start including machine learning algorithms or AI into these processes. So we increased the amount of electrodes that were on the head. For those who don't know about EEG, you kind of see them all in medical movies, the caps that people wear with tons of probes on them. So we used that, and we started putting the data through 3 different machine learning methods. And at the table at the bottom there, you can kind of see how successful we were in determining what the intent of the person wearing it was. So I might need to explain that a little bit more. What we wanted to do was to see if we could use motor imagery, which is when somebody thinks about an action, if we could figure out what that action is that they're thinking about according to what's coming from them or coming from their skull. I should say this is all non-invasive, so we're not cutting any people open to do any of this stuff. And we were successful. If we did it in isolation, we could get 4 different grasps or gestures at one time. Meaning we could tell if somebody was thinking, I want to do a power grasp or a ball grasp or a pinch or a key grasp, which is more useful than just turning on and off a prosthetic by your concentration. You can see in the blue bars there, when we started to do it in real time and trying to determine between all 4 different graphs simultaneously, we got this huge drop-off in accuracy. So again, it's another step forward, but it wasn't quite good enough. So that was one of those challenges and blocks where I thought, what's next? And I had the idea that perhaps we simplify the whole program or the whole system. We take a lot of the cognitive function of the people using this machine away so that they need to do just something simple. And we put all of that weight of determining what they're going to grab and what they're trying to get onto autonomous robotics. And what that looks like is we've got two pictures there where a camera has been mounted to a prosthetic hand. That camera can determine what object is next to it. It then, by itself, adapts to the kind of pre-grasping shape of the object. So it already knows what the object is, and the user or amputee hasn't needed to do anything yet. You can kind of relate it to, if you're conscious about it, the next time you go and grab anything, your hand is naturally already pre-shaping itself to the next pen you grasp because you do it subconsciously. So this is us trying to biomimicry, trying to copy the subconscious process that the human body goes through. And with that process, we were able to do it far more accurately than the previous system, and we're able to do it faster as well. So you'll see the orange line there was the previous system, the blue line there is this new semi-autonomous control system. I'll mention this briefly, is the types of grasp strategies that we put together for that object detection or that machine vision system. So depending on some of the characteristics of the objects that are being seen by the hand, we have this grasp mapping that determines, firstly, whether the hand that you are trying to control can actually grasp the object, and then if it can, what the best shape or configuration of the hand is to grasp those objects. So the initial learnings were that in non-invasive neuroprosthetics, there's a competitive relationship between response and accuracy. So what that means is if you're trying to be really accurate, it's going to take you about a minute to pick up the object, which is not really great. If you're trying to be quick, then your accuracy is going to go right down. And so semi-autonomous systems have the potential to overcome that limitation. The next one, and I will be studying this further, is by simplifying the system or removing unnecessary user involvement from a system to make it more natural and intuitive. The final one that I want to bring up, and I learned throughout this whole process, and I think it's kind of the main thing that I learned, was that the loss of a limb is not just physical. There's a social element, there's a spiritual element, an emotional element, and they all change the life of someone suffering from amputation or nervous system disorders. What that means, unfortunately, is that an engineering approach alone cannot address this problem. Now, what I mean by that is throughout my moving around New Zealand and other countries, when you get down to the grass level and you ask amputees, what do you want? Or what do you think of the process when you received your prosthetic? It's not usually about the actual prosthetic itself. It's about their interaction with their family. It's about what it let them do or not do. It's about their experience at the hospital. It's about all these really intangible things that a physical implement isn't going to address. And so there's this another door opening now where I have the opportunity to look into all of these different things and different paths that as an engineer that I can have an influence on to help increase the rate of prosthetic acceptance. So what's next? Further investigation into semi-autonomous systems for prosthetic control. something that's close to my heart, and what I would absolutely love to do is to look at the indigenous influence, well, mātauranga Māori or Māori knowledge systems can have on this type of work in the nature of rehabilitation. And the reason for that is it's very closely related, or it's a more holistic approach to addressing this problem, which is more suited. And then finally, virtual rehabilitation. The opportunity to make virtual prosthetics that someone can try out in virtual reality and decide whether they like it then and there, so we're not spending all this money on prosthetics unneeded. Or if a prosthetic's not available for them, they can go in and try these prosthetics. And so that's what we're kind of working on at the moment. A lot of this work has been individual, but there are a lot of people I need to thank for the support of what I've gone through. Chikit Ao, my supervisor throughout my doctorate, and a few of the funding bodies from New Zealand, the Royal Society, Te Aparangi, and the Health Research Council. I just want to finish, because I can see there's a little bit of time there, by saying how grateful I am to be able to speak with all of you. You are all amazing, I hope you know that. We're listening to some of the greatest scientists in the world right now, and I don't think it's short of me to say that a lot of you are going to change the world in some way or another. So just a bit of encouragement for me to go for it, even though you know it's going to get hard. But tēnei te mihi ki a koutou, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. We now invite Dr. Gu to moderate the Q&A.
Thank you for that excellent talk. So at this stage, this is a Q&A session. So please don't be afraid and ask away any of your questions. Does anyone brave enough want to be the first person somewhere?
Hi, thank you.
Oh,
thank you.
sir.
Thank you very much for your talk. It was really, really good. I have one question about the prosthetic hand that you developed. So you mentioned classification problems in order to determine what type of grasp to perform. Is there already any way to involve feedback as well? Because from the hand being sent back to what you actually perceive, so that you, for example, I think you mentioned a key grasp, like putting that into context of an actual movement, putting the key into the lock. I presume you need a lot of feedback perception in order to know, okay, like I have put the key in. Is there already any possibility to involve that feedback from the hand back to kind of, perceiving this sensory information?
Great question. Yeah, absolutely. There's quite a few people who have already done similar things. I've done kind of crude versions of them, where you'd have a prosthetic with a force sensor in the fingertip, and you'd touch something and it kind of shocks you, letting you know you've touched something. So there's a little bit of development on my side for that. Another really interesting one is just the continuous feedback of being able to close your eyes and still operate a prosthetic with those feelings still being intact. So yeah, a bit of work to do there. And did that answer it?
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much. Maybe one follow-up question is, did the patients report as well how they did perceive that difference in order of perception with respect to a normal hand that functioned before the amputation, for example?
You might need to re-ask that one, sorry.
Sorry, because you mentioned that they get an electric shock, right?
Oh.
Like, I mean, in the end, this is very similar to my understanding for what you would sense anyways, but like that is... Like
I need to put a disclaimer on that one. That was my family. I wasn't about to go and shock anyone.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Do we have another question?
Great talk. I was just wondering, with the problem in latency or having to think too long about a grasp, you offload that to machine learning and other peripherals now, but would it also be an option to make it more invasive and speed up the feedback loop that way? Because everything you showed was non-invasive, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it is a great question. The answer is yes. But the challenge is that difference between going invasive or not when someone's preference is to not. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Thank
Over
you.
there.
Hi, thank you for a fascinating talk. My name's Elise and I'm a mental health professional from Australia. I was wondering, well, thank you for bringing this back to the human side of things throughout your talk. And I'm wondering if you could comment on the types of mental health or counselling support that people who've experienced limb loss might go through when it comes to this rehabilitation process.
Yeah, that's a pretty heavy question and probably a bit out of my scope and field. I imagine you would have a lot more knowledge in those areas. So with the few experiences I do have, the range of reactions from amputees and the experience is so varying that it's hard to say that there's a common theme among all of them. There is definitely, well, it's traumatic, and a lot of people react to traumatic experiences differently. So it's yeah.
Do we have any further questions from the audience? Not, I have a quick, more engineering-oriented question myself. Obviously, given the vast complexity of the hand, the amount of information that I imagine that must propagate from our signal source, the brain, to the hand is quite immense. Do you have a rough estimate of the bandwidth, so sort of the amount of information that's being passed through? Is it on the order of megabytes per second, or is there a way of estimating this sort of thing?
Yeah, so there is, and there's quite a big range depending on the system you use. A lot of the things we use are off-the-shelf EEG acquisition headsets with all different rates. And so there's a huge cross-section of different things you can use. But a lot of my decision-making on the system or the choice of those headsets was more towards how does it fit with the actual mechanical hand?
Right.
Because I found that the link between the two was more important than the actual maximum capabilities of either. So it was more of a mix and match process rather than a let's get the best of both.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I think we're out of time, and let us all thank the speaker. That was for his excellent.